In June of 1995, a Border Patrol unit went missing somewhere outside Loma Alta, Texas. No distress call, no sign of a struggle, just a vehicle that stopped answering the radio and never came back. For over a decade, the case sat in storage, just another unsolved disappearance out in the dry country. But then, during a routine flyover of flood-damaged terrain, a chopper caught something glinting in the sand. Half a roof rack, a sun-bleached door panel, and a number. That was the moment everything changed. Before we start, hit subscribe to help uncover stories they tried to bury, and make sure no name stays forgotten. My name's Dana Reich. I'm 48 years old now, and I've spent most of my adult life in some form of law enforcement. First as a Border Patrol agent, then later with DOJ rotation, mostly internal affairs. Not the flashy stuff people imagine. Mostly paperwork audits, talking to people who'd rather not be spoken to. But back in '95, I was stationed out of Sector H, not too far from the Rio Grande. I'd crossed paths with Rachel Prescott exactly twice. Once during orientation, once on a morning rotation at the base gate. That's all. She was quiet, young, came from Del Rio, I think, just weeks into field work when she disappeared. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I don't think any of us did. Disappearances weren't unheard of along the border. People quit. People ran. People got tired of living in motels and driving through dust and silence for 12 hours a day. So when Rachel stopped responding to dispatch, they told us she left, that she'd gone off the books, and maybe back then I wanted to believe that too, because the alternative that one of our own could vanish under government clearance and not a single person lift a finger to look for her was harder to carry. Still, something about it stuck with me. The way her name was pulled off the duty roster without a word. The way her family's calls started getting bounced. The way the station held a half-hearted potluck 2 days after she disappeared without even setting a place for her. It felt wrong. But you learn not to ask, especially out there. I stayed in the system another 6 years before transferring into oversight. From there, I kept my head down, did my job, followed the rotation. And I didn't think about Rachel again. Not really. Not until that call came in from Sector D12 11 years later. A surveillance chopper had been doing grid sweeps after the monsoon washouts. Pilot logged something odd buried in a collapsed gully near mile marker 81. Half a Chevy Suburban. No plates. Door code barely visible under layers of silt, but enough left to read 4207. They routed the notification through DHS. Then, to my desk. I didn't volunteer, but I went. And the second I stepped onto that excavation site, I knew this wasn't just a recovery. The air was too still. The team too quiet. And when they cracked the rear door open and that wave of stale metallic air rolled out, I remembered what it smelled like when someone didn't walk away. They cracked the rear doors open just before noon. Years of sand had hardened along the seams, fusing the hinges in place until the second crowbar gave and the latch buckled. The air that came out wasn't strong, but it was wrong. Dry, sour, and stale in a way you don't forget once you've smelled it. I stayed back at first, just watched as the techs leaned in with gloves and a light, talking low. No one raised their voice. No one cracked a joke. That vehicle had been sitting out there for over a decade, but what was inside had left its mark. There were dark stains across the cargo liner, faded, dried, sun-cooked into the plastic, but still there. One of the techs called it right away. Blood. Too far gone to type, too dry to lift directly. But it pooled. Not splatter, not a drip or a smear. It had settled, like someone had bled out there slowly. That told us more than we wanted. The front passenger door was easier. Sun damage had already done half the job. I stood just behind the tech as he popped the glove box with a flat tool and eased it open. Inside was a warped incident logbook, spiral-bound and badly curled. Pages yellowed and stuck together in clumps, but the ink where it hadn't bled was still legible. The name at the top was faint but readable. Prescott R. It was hers. The entry stopped mid-June, right before her last patrol. A broken pen was still lodged in the wire coil tip, snapped like she'd tried to write something and didn't get to finish. We found the radio mic next, snapped at the base, its cord coiled and frayed behind the console like it had been yanked or crushed. The last item to come out of that cab was her sidearm. .40 caliber Border Patrol standard issue for that time. Serial number worn but intact. Magazine was half full. 3 rounds missing. The tech read that out loud without comment. I didn't say anything either. Brewer showed up again around that point. Campaign hat, long sleeves, voice just as clipped as I remembered. "You're opening up a can of history nobody asked for," he said, not even looking at the vehicle. I kept my eyes forward. "She didn't walk away," I told him. "You know that." He exhaled hard through his nose the way men do when they've already decided the conversation isn't worth having. "You pull on one missing agent, you'll get a dozen more. You really want to chase ghosts." I said nothing. Just watched the Suburban get winched up onto the flatbed inch by inch. There was no ceremony, no urgency. Just the sound of cables tightening and the metal groaning in the heat. We tagged everything: Rachel's notebook, her pen, even a scratched ID number on the back cover I couldn't quite place. I ordered it all routed through Laredo. Evidence chain, no detours. One of the newer techs hesitated when I asked for full logging. "You want the pen tracked too?" I said yes. Everything. That's how you find what someone left behind. Not in the big things. In the parts that didn't seem worth noticing. Later that day, I pulled the old microfilm records at the field office. A kid named Sweeney was working the desk. Fresh haircut badge, clipped too high like he hadn't worn it long enough to let it settle. He flipped through a few folders, came back with one labeled 95. Not much in it. Just some onboarding paperwork, a form or two, and a single thin file marked Prescott R. He slid it into the tray between us and leaned back like that was the end of it. I asked if they had her patrol rotation. He shook his head. "You'll have to go through dispatch archives. But heads up, they don't like requests that old." I thanked him anyway. The archive room was exactly what I remembered: dry, air-low ceilings, no windows. I sat down with the radio log from June 17th, 1995, and started reading. Most of it was mundane. Weather calls, routine vehicle checks, standard chatter. Then, at 1842, there it was. Unit 4207, Rachel Prescott, reporting vehicle inspection at Culvert 73 south of Checkpoint Charlie. Handwritten notation, no audio. That was the last confirmed ping. After that, nothing. I wrote the location down. I remembered that stretch, dry wash, bad radio coverage known for moving high-value cargo. Back then, only senior agents took that route. Rachel was neither, but the log said she went south around 1720, 2 miles off her assigned route. No explanation. No detour logged. Nothing to suggest why. I tracked down Westbrook next. Used to be in her unit. Ran a tire shop now out in Roma. He remembered her right away. Said she was quiet, didn't drink, didn't gossip. Good rookie. Her route changed that day, I said. Any idea why? He shook his head. Ask Sanders. He was doing dispatch that week. I showed him the resignation letter her family received. He looked at it like it was a bad copy job. Not my handwriting. Probably admin. I asked if he remembered a search. He didn't blink. There wasn't one. I pulled the paper shift logs next. June 17th showed Rachel signed in at 14 hours. Patrolling grid reference 449 through 453. Culvert 73 wasn't part of that. Yet somehow she ended up there. She'd made one routine stop at 1635. A 94 Ford pickup. No citation issued. Just logged and cleared. The same page listed her final radio check at 1842. After that, the rest of the sheet was blank. Supervisor signature, C. Sanders. Down in the dispatch basement, I asked for the tapes from that week. A junior tech named Holcomb led me through. Shelves of old reels stacked like bones. We had a compressor failure that summer, she told me. Fried a whole set of backups. Of course it did. She pulled the logbook and pointed to the shelf label Q3195. Mostly Sector J and K, she said. Yours included. I asked for the serial numbers of the damaged reels. She wrote them down without asking why. Back in my rental, I laid out everything across the front seat. The notebook, the logs, the missing tape, the rerouted patrol, the altered radio record. No search, no real resignation. Just a name slowly erased. If Rachel walked away, she didn't pack for it, and someone had made damn sure no one went looking. The file was dormant but not closed. I filled out the reclassification form that night and walked it into Brewer's office myself. He didn't look up right away, just kept tapping his pen on the desk. "It's reopened," I said. "Suspicious circumstances." He leaned back, stared straight through me. "You better know what you're kicking up." I did. That's why I kicked it. I was back in the archive room when I found it a misfiled civilian statement tucked behind a 1996 tire theft report. It was written in block letters. Said they saw a Border Patrol SUV slow roll past the west fence. 8:30 p.m., maybe. Looked like Prescott's rig. A black SUV followed. No plates. Sat there. Waited. Then followed her south. Signed H. Galvin, Ranch 43. There was no record of this in the official file. No interview logged. No follow-up. I drove out to Galvin's ranch the next morning. It was quiet, overgrown, but not abandoned. He answered the door wearing a sweat-stained shirt and a hat pulled low. "You're the first law to ask about that in 10 years, he said. We sat on his porch. He poured warm water from a jug. Told me what he saw. Said Rachel's rig came down the road slow. Said another vehicle was waiting. Black Tahoe tinted tucked behind a trailer. Didn't move until she passed. Then it followed. Did you report it? I asked. He nodded. Told a supervisor. He paused, squinting at the horizon. Sanders, I think. I thanked him and left. Later that evening, I requested access to Rachel's weapon file. The chain of custody showed it was logged for temporary retention on June 20th, 1995. Not marked for testing. Not logged for ballistics. Final entry destroyed standard clearance 1999. The destruction box missing from the manifest. I dug through storage myself. Between old travel reimbursements and weather dispatch forms from '96, I found it. A single, unsigned complaint form. Copier misaligned. Dated June 4th. It described unlawful detainment near a defunct water tower 3 miles east of her assigned zone. No transport call. No backup. Just a group being held. And a description of an unmarked vehicle. The handwriting matched Rachel's notebook. I had enough now to stop pretending this was routine. I flagged Leo Carnes in operations, one of the few techs I trusted. Something's missing, I said. He nodded. When she disappeared, things got moved. Logs were reassigned. Vehicle histories scrubbed. Quiet, but intentional. I asked if he ever reported it. Once he said, "They sent me to inventory tracking for 3 years. I didn't go to Sanders right away." I waited. Watched his movements, tracked his routine. And on the 4th night, I saw him meet someone outside an old tire lot in the east end of a commercial park. Sanders climbed into the passenger seat. The driver sat still, wide shoulders straight, posture cap pulled low. It was Brewer. I turned the dial on the parabolic mic. Static at first, then fragments. Sanders. You told me that sector was clear. Brewer wasn't supposed to surface. Then silence. Then, we clean it up, like before. I turned off the mic, backed out of the lot without being seen. Drove 5 miles south, parked, waited. and just after midnight, I watched Sanders pull off the highway onto a private dirt road. He was carrying a plastic bin, holding it tight, and he was headed toward the old well. He moved like it was something he'd practiced, didn't look around, didn't hesitate, just parked his SUV near the overgrown fence line and stepped out with that plastic bin clutched in both hands. No flashlight, no gloves. He walked straight to the old well casing near the pump station, a squat concrete ring just high enough to trip over if you weren't looking for it. I stayed low behind the ridge wind, pushing dry grit across the ground beside me. There was no sound except his boots on the gravel. I saw the moment the bin caught on the edge of the shaft. He gave it one sharp shove and it dropped. He stood there a second longer, staring down into the dark like it might answer him. Then he turned and left. I didn't follow him back. I waited. Long enough for the stillness to return, then longer, just to be sure. I called in a favor the next morning from someone I trusted, Hud Wallace, a quiet county tech who knew how to keep things off paper. He'd worked burn sites before, places where the truth had been buried shallow on purpose. We arrived before sunrise, no markings on the truck except a peel-off decal that read, Survey Division. The wind hadn't kicked up yet, so we could still track the indentations. The spot wasn't hard to find. The earth had a different texture, looser, like something had been disturbed and settled again. 32 inches down, I struck canvas. Hud marked the edge and took photos while I cleared the dirt by hand. The bag was old, zippered, sun-bleached, stiff in places where the heat had baked it through. I opened it slow. The air inside was stale and sour, a dead sort of dry that clung to the throat. The remains were folded in tight. Human, female, still partially wrapped in a military poncho, the fabric stuck to the bones in places where it hadn't fully degraded. Duct tape clung to both wrists, frayed but intact. Hud rolled the collar back, and a small object tumbled out, landing near the edge of the bag. A silver wristwatch, cracked hands frozen at 7:16. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. We tagged everything, preserved what we could. The coroner's lab was cold and clinical walls too clean for the kind of weight that room held. Dr. Alicia Frey ran the scan and read the results out loud, her voice steady. Female. Dental matched. Cause of death, gunshot to the spine. Close range. No exit wound. Angled downward from behind. Execution style. She tapped a scan of the vertebrae where the partial round had lodged, degraded, but enough to trace the alloy. Border Patrol issue, she said, glancing up. From that time period. I asked about stippling. None. Just heat damage and sediment pressure. She shook her head. Not cartel. Wrong caliber. Wrong ammo. This wasn't a cross-border hit. I already knew that. What I didn't know was how far up it went. That night, I filed everything, photos, lab results, soil readings, badge fragment, the watch, sealed it with DOJ grade encryption, and sent it to the same contact who'd greenlit my last drop. 5 days later, the response came through a secure line. You sent the Prescott file, the voice said. I confirmed. Task force approved. Quiet scope, no press, no local crossover. First sweep begins with Brewer. I didn't speak, just listened. Then the voice said, he's on the red list. I nodded into the dark of the motel room. Then I'll keep digging. I didn't go after Brewer first. I went back to Sanders. He was in the system now, sidelined at a satellite field office with no field badge and no clearance. I caught him just after shift. He was walking to his car with a takeout bag and no sense of what was coming. I didn't give him a speech. Just stepped into his path and showed him a clear pouch with the cracked wristwatch inside. Then a sealed fragment from the bullet we pulled. Then a page from the shift log he signed the night she disappeared. You were the last to check her in, I said, and you're going to be the first to help me finish this. We sat in a side room at the Santa Cruz station. No cameras, no wires. Just a recorder, a table, and a man who hadn't slept properly in a long time. I'm not wired, I said. You talk, I listen. You help me write this down, and maybe you get to leave upright. He nodded, hands shaking. I asked about the tower. His voice barely made it across the table. She wasn't scheduled for that sector, he said. Brewer rerouted her. Told dispatch it was a special rotation. Only a few people knew. I asked why. He swallowed hard. Because of what we were doing there. He laid it out slowly. There was no processing center, not on paper. That tower had been converted. Not official. No paperwork. Migrants pulled from known corridors were held there before being moved off books. No chain of custody. No logs. Some wore uniforms, he said some didn't. Cartel paid us to stay quiet. Move people. Look the other way. I asked about Rachel. She called me that night, he said. Said she heard voices inside. Movement. She hadn't filed anything yet. Wanted me to take a look before she went formal. I asked what she saw. Holding cells, he said, voice almost gone. 2 kids, no tags, said they'd been there for days. I didn't interrupt. I let him sit with it. He looked down at his hands. She said if I didn't file, she would. I waited. Brewer showed up 20 minutes later. Told her it was authorized. That if she went public, it'd bury her family too. I asked what she did. He looked away. She said no. Got in her truck. I left. Didn't want to be there. 10 minutes later, I heard the shot. I didn't say anything. I just slid a file across the table. Headshots, missing persons, internal reports, names I'd been carrying for weeks. He didn't flinch. Jonah Avery filed a discrepancy report. Lucille Reiner flagged a transport delay. Paul Diaz started asking about fuel logs on unmarked vans. None of them lasted the year. I flipped the page. What about support staff? He didn't blink. Nathan Cordry Logistics. Jacob Hanley Sheriff's Office used to ride escort. Wore real badges, but they weren't official. Just names on paper. Nothing else. I asked who signed the resignations. He pointed to Brewer's name without needing to read. An hour later, I walked him to the side lot where a federal vehicle waited. No logos. Just a marshal in the driver's seat, engine running. Sanders didn't ask where he was going. He didn't look back either. Just climbed in and let the door shut behind him. The confession was solid. But I knew that wasn't the top. It wasn't even close. This thing went deeper. And someone else was still out there keeping it quiet. And whatever they were protecting, it wasn't over. After Sanders was taken into custody, the quiet settled in hard. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't peace. It was more like the stillness you get when the wind dies out just before a monsoon hits. Everything was technically moving, but it felt stalled. Internally, the DOJ had authorized the first sweep low-visibility restricted access, minimal footprint. On paper, I was running routine follow-ups. In practice, I was tearing through 17 years' worth of sealed dust and misplaced names trying to piece together what hadn't been shredded. I stayed off the digital grid as much as I could. Used an offline drive to map connections. Most of them faint. Some barely more than a line of ink on the corner of a folded memo. But they repeated. 4 names. Rachel Prescott, Jonah Avery, Paul Diaz, Lucille Reiner. Every one of them had filed some kind of misconduct notice. Every one of them assigned to unmonitored sectors. Every one of them flagged as resigned missing or presumed drowned. No deaths, no investigations, no follow-up. What came back across my desk was thinner than it should have been, and what didn't come back at all told me more than the pieces I held. I ran their complaints side by side, different formats, different wordings, but there was something similar threaded through each. Variations on the same phrases: unauthorized transport, holding off-grid detainment, no documentation observed, no radio confirmation filed. Some referred to trucks with no plate numbers. Others mentioned vehicles bearing federal markings inconsistent with issue. One used the term pace privado. I circled that one twice. No definition matched. Not in field slang, not in tactical shorthand. When I searched it, the closest I found was an old colloquialism used to describe private ground held under protection but not by landowners. Usually meant cartel-controlled zones, but in these reports, the usage didn't quite fit. The meaning was closer to off-limits by someone higher. That stuck with me. I started making late-night calls to people who owed me favors, or just had long enough memories to remember the feel of things when no one else did. I didn't ask them for proof. I asked what they remembered. Most gave cautious answers. One didn't. The call came through my burner 3:17 p.m. Male voice, mid-40s, maybe. Chihuahua accent softened by time. He didn't say his name. Just asked if I was the one asking about the woman agent near Loma in 95. I told him yes. He said a coyote who used to run with Mando Zayas told a story about a female patrol unit that followed a decoy vehicle north of Sector K. She chased it alone, unaware that it was staged. The cartel didn't intercept her. They saw her and left her alone. Too close to someone's pace, the voice said. Privado. I asked who. He hung up. I don't jump at shadows. You can't in this kind of work. But that night I reviewed topographic overlays of the tower grid and marked every location tied to a report disappearance or deviation from routing protocol. 4 tower sites came up. Only one had no formal decommissioning paperwork. Relay 9, north of Kamado. Nothing around it for miles but scrub-dry riverbed and fence line. I called in Eli Vargas, the same young agent who'd handed me that anonymous tape weeks earlier. He didn't ask questions. Just met me outside Sierra Blanca, took the binoculars and the map and nodded. What do you want? He asked. Eyes on movement, I said. Any vehicles, any signs of recent access. No photos. Just times, plates, and direction. He understood. 3 days later, he met me just before dusk. The tower hadn't been touched in years, but the sand at the entry threshold was disturbed. Not wind-blown, not animal, shifted by boots. At least one person had been through in the past 2 weeks. We entered without flashlights. The air inside was still the kind that holds on to heat even after the sun's dropped. Nothing on the surface floor, just some cable husks and rusted equipment. But the panel near the base of the tower looked off, loose at the hinges. I slid it open. Inside, tucked behind a dead conduit, was a sealed evidence pouch. Dust-covered, heat-warped, but intact. I pulled it out and opened it in the back of the vehicle. Inside was a tarnished Border Patrol badge and a cracked ID tag. Name still legible. Jonah Avery. The system listed Avery as presumed drowned near Falcon Lake in 1994. Said his truck had been found stuck in the mud near the shore. No body, no recovery. His file was 2 paragraphs long. No autopsy, no incident report longer than a receipt. But what stood out most wasn't the absence. It was the timing. Avery's last internal memo, filed by hand, had been logged just weeks before he vanished. Same phrasing as Rachel's. Same concern. Same pattern. I laid the badge beside the others. 4 names, 4 disappearances, 4 silence files, 1 shape. I didn't go home that night. I stayed up mapping every remaining report I could find with similar flags, unauthorized rerouting, undocumented detainment, or patrol log contradictions. Most led nowhere. A few didn't. That's when the envelope showed up. No return address, postmarked from Lubbock. Inside were 5 photographs, time-stamped 1995. All grainy, scanned from old negatives. But in the third one, Rachel stood at the base of Relay 9 in full uniform. Her posture was straight, but her expression unreadable. Next to her were 3 men, faces turned away, backs mostly to the camera. 2 wore tactical pants and windbreakers with no patches. The third wore a Border Patrol jacket. But the insignia was wrong font, too large, stitched too low. It was a prop, and someone had worn it to be seen. I ran facial recognition through DOJ archives. Nothing. No matches. No identifiers. but I didn't need names to understand what I was looking at. Rachel hadn't stumbled on something. She'd been watched, followed. She was marked before she ever made that final call. The next morning, I slid into my cruiser for a call with the liaison team. As soon as I turned the key, I smelled it. Sharp, sweet, not right. I threw the door open just before the front end of the vehicle went up in flame. Fire crew arrived fast. 7 minutes. But they didn't need long to confirm it wasn't electrical. Accelerant poured through the vent intake, likely with an ignition delay. Someone had waited for me to sit down. Later that day, I stood in the station lot filling out the incident form. Acting Captain Milt Connors looked over my shoulder and shook his head. "You're making enemies," he said quietly. "Big ones. We've had feds come through here before, but nobody pulls threads like this." I didn't answer. I just handed the clipboard back and walked out. I drove east to a truck stop outside Sierra Blanca. No cell coverage, but I got my DOJ contact on the motel line. Told him what happened. "We expected pushback," he said. "You'll get one team, 4 agents, no press, no trail, make it count." I said I would. Then I called Sanders. His voice was rough, like he hadn't slept. "You told me they met off-grid," I said. "Where?" There was a pause. "Staging shack," he said finally. "Old border utility site past Red Cut Wash. Brewer always liked dirt floors, easier to clean." I asked if he was sure. He was. I wrote the coordinates down. Then I stared at them. There wasn't going to be another warning after this. No fire, no missed tape, no shadow with a badge stitched too low. The next time they tried to erase something, it wasn't going to be paper. And I was walking straight into it. I got the call from the substation mid-afternoon. A young agent, barely out of academy, by the sound of his voice, said he had something. Didn't want to say over the phone. Asked if I could come by in person. I told him I was 15 minutes out and not to move until I got there. When I pulled up, he was waiting just inside the intake office, pacing by the copier. Nervous, but not panicked. He didn't introduce himself at first, just checked the hallway, then pulled a small black cassette from his jacket pocket and handed it to me without a word. "It was in my locker this morning," he said finally. No note. Just there. I looked at its standard issue field recorder tape. Worn, labeled in blue pen, smudged, but still legible. I asked if anyone else saw him with it. He shook his head. "I think someone wants it heard," he said. "But I don't want to know more." I asked his name. "Eli Vargas," he said quietly. "But you didn't get that from me. I found an old tape deck in the station archive room. Had to try 2 before I got one that worked." The machine hissed when I slid the cassette in, then clicked as the reels caught. The audio was uneven, fluttering with age, but the voices came through. The first was Rachel's. No mistaking it. Steady calm, clipped the way she always sounded on radio checks. "I'm not covering this," she said. Then static. Then again, louder. "You're not hearing me. I'll file it myself if you won't." The next voice was male. Lower. Slower. "You need to think about what you're doing." And then her voice again, clearer this time. "I already have." Then silence. The tape clicked, reeled out, and stopped. I took the cassette and sealed it in an evidence pouch, marked it with her name, and filed it under restricted chain. No digital copy, no transcript. Just one copy. Just hers. That night I met Eli again just outside Sierra Blanca. Gave him a map and a pair of binoculars and pointed him toward an old communications relay that had been officially decommissioned since 1997. Locals still called it Relay 9, though nobody used the name anymore. I told him what to watch for. Not lights, not personnel, just movement, vehicles, entry points, sand shifts. He took the map and nodded. "You want photos?" he asked. "No, just times and direction." "You expecting visitors?" "I think they already came," I said. The next morning, I made a stop at a regional substation off Highway 83. I'd requested access to 1995 intake ledgers processing logs, booking tags, holding entries, anything that could confirm or deny the existence of migrant transfers in the weeks surrounding Rachel's last shift. Most of what I found was routine misdemeanor citations, outdated arrest logs, the usual noise. But wedged between two binders of traffic violations, I found a single intake sheet with faint ink and one name I hadn't seen before. No badge number, no official ID, just initials NC and an inventory entry line that read Intake Supplement Record Auxiliary Support. The date matched the night Rachel disappeared. That was enough. Later that week, while reviewing Rachel's old incident notebook at the lab, I got a ping from the DOJ liaison. He wanted a secure update. I gave him everything what Sanders confessed, what the badge evidence suggested the matched pattern in detainment logs. Then I asked him a question I hadn't said out loud until then. Is this ours, I asked, or theirs? He didn't answer directly. Just said, you keep building the case. When it's ready, we'll push it wide. That evening, I was going over field memos when a second package showed up at the front desk. Plain manila envelope, hand-delivered, no markings. Inside were 3 printed stills photos taken from what looked like security footage. Grainy, time-stamped May 11th, 1995. In the corner of one, Rachel was visible near the edge of a frame. Her shoulders squared, her stance formal, like she didn't know she was being watched. Behind her were 2 men in plain tactical gear. One wore a windbreaker with a U.S. emblem that didn't match regulation. Wrong size, wrong font, wrong placement. The kind you see on knockoff badges meant for quick impression, not authority. It didn't look like intimidation. It looked like preparation. I knew by then that whatever Rachel had stepped into, she wasn't alone in it. She hadn't stumbled onto a crime. She'd gotten close to a structure. Something designed to outlast the agents who questioned it. I marked every known point she'd reported from. Culvert 73, Sector J Grid 449, Relay 9. Then I added 2 new locations drawn from old freight invoices tied to a shuttered outpost mile marker 218 and a stretch called Red Cut Wash. I made one last call that night, not to a liaison, not to DOJ. I called Eric Prescott. I hadn't spoken to him since we found Rachel. I'd wanted to wait until something concrete could be said, something that wouldn't put weight back on him. But I needed to understand something from someone who knew her outside of the uniform. He picked up on the second ring. No hello. Just quiet on the other end. She didn't run, I said. I know, he said softly. She wouldn't have. Not without saying goodbye. I asked him if she ever talked about her reports, if she'd told him what she'd been seeing out there. He said no. She kept that line tight, said she was watching something. I asked what that meant. He paused, said there were people she trusted to do the job, and people she didn't. Then before I could thank him, he said, if you're still looking, keep going. She was right. She just ran out of time. I ended the call, sat in the quiet for a while, then made one last entry in the logbook I'd started the night we reopened her case. Under findings, I wrote, confirmed route shift, confirmed holding site, confirmed system manipulation, pattern established. I paused, pen hovering, and added, she wasn't the only one. The evidence was almost there, fragmented but real. But what I needed next wasn't more paper. It was a body, or a voice, or both, and I had a feeling I knew where they'd buried the rest. The old staging shack sat about a quarter mile off the main road, just past a turn most folks missed unless they knew where to look. From a distance, it didn't look like much low metal siding rust creeping up from the foundation roof line sagged slightly in the middle. There weren't any signs left, just a dirt lot ringed with scrub and mesquite. No cameras, no power. No reason for anyone to be there now, except someone was. I'd confirmed it through the DOJ team monitored pings from a secure cell tied to Brewer's network had hit the area more than once in the last 60 days. No outgoing calls, just check-ins. Enough to suggest activity, enough to draw him out. I made the call to Tieran, the U.S. Marshal assigned to our field detail. He was in his 40s, quiet, methodical. Didn't ask for explanations I didn't offer. I gave him the coordinates and told him what we were dealing with: one potential suspect, possibly armed, definitely careful. 2 unmarked vehicles confirmed on past nights. We wouldn't get a second chance. The team arrived in 2 SUVs, Tieran, Monroe, and Wolf. No insignia, no plates, analog comms only. The kind of entry that doesn't leave fingerprints. We parked behind a low ridge just southeast of the shack, using a collapsed livestock fence as cover. From there, we waited. I used a burner phone I'd traced back to Sanders, the one they used for drop coordination. I typed the message myself, short and clean. Old papers need moving. Audit next week. No delays. Usual place. We watched the cell tower logs from a remote relay. 20 minutes later, a reply came through. Relay 218 confirmed. 1 extra joining. Keep it clean. No name. But it was Brewer's cadence. I'd read enough of his incident reports to recognize it. The sun dropped behind the hills around 8:40. By 9:15, the road cooled enough for tracks to start registering in the dirt again. At 9:54, a single SUV came over the rise. Chevy Tahoe, dust-caked, low beams only. It pulled up, slow stopped just short of the shack's west entrance. 1 figure stepped out, tall, stocky, ball cap pulled low, tan slacks, black windbreaker, Brewer. He didn't hesitate. Walked the perimeter like he was checking a fence line, then moved toward the building. 2 minutes later, another vehicle came in, older model plates, nearly unreadable under dirt. This one parked at an angle near the back lot. The man who stepped out wasn't familiar. Late 50s, close-cut hair, civilian jacket, but the way he carried himself wasn't casual. He pulled a duffel from the back seat and slung it over his shoulder like it didn't weigh a thing. I adjusted the scope and dialed the gain on the directional mic. From behind the ridge, Monroe whispered the feed through our comms. "Getting fragments," she said. "Audit, not clean. Shred list before rotation." Another pause. Then Brewer's voice. "Did you burn the cruiser?" The reply came lower. I did what had to be done. That was all we needed. I gave the signal. Tieran flanked left. Monroe and Wolf moved in tight from the rear. I stood up slow, keeping my weapon low, and stepped out of the shadow line. Federal Marshal Tieran called, "Don't move." Brewer froze. The courier didn't. He dropped the bag and ran, cutting across the lot toward the north slope. Wolf broke after him. I heard gravel spray the snap of brush under boots, the sharp metallic clack of cuffs less than 30 seconds later. Brewer didn't resist. Didn't speak either. He just turned, raised his hands, and watched me walk toward him like it had all gone exactly the way he expected. Len Brewer. I said, "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice conspiracy and the murder of Agent Rachel Prescott." His face didn't shift, not even a blink, just one slow exhale through his nose. Then he said, "You made it further than most." I held his stare. "You left a trail." He gave the faintest shrug. "You don't know the half of it." Then he turned around, wrists held out, and let them cuff him. We opened the duffel on site. Inside were 3 ledgers, handwritten logs dated between 1993 and 1996. Names. Drop dates. Holding sites. Most had no official tag numbers. A few were marked with faint red X's. There was also a VHS tape labeled Relay 51195, 2 rolls of undeveloped film, and a melted badge partially intact. One of the initials on the intake slips matched Brewer's signature from his time in Sector H. Not a copy. Not a forgery. Direct match. That was enough. The DOJ moved fast. Charges were filed within 48 hours. Brewer was held without bail in a federal detention unit out of Laredo. His legal team filed for delay on health grounds. Denied. The courier refused to speak. Didn't claim a name. No prints in the system. But the documents tied him to a contractor service once subcontracted through DHS Logistics back in '94. That thread unraveled quietly in the background. One arrest led to another, then another. Sanders entered a sealed plea deal, 30 years with the possibility of parole. His testimony opened 2 more files, one on a former DHS transport coordinator, the other on a county deputy whose name had appeared on falsified routing logs. At Brewer's trial, he maintained his innocence. Said the sites were used during an unstable era. Said Rachel misunderstood, overreacted, that her death wasn't ordered, just unfortunate. But the jury didn't buy it. Not with the physical evidence, not with the confession, not with what we found buried under that old tower. They handed down a conviction on all counts. Second-degree murder, obstruction, federal conspiracy, life, no parole. It was a quiet Tuesday when the burial took place. Private plot just north of Amarillo. No cameras, no headlines, just a modest service under the shade of 2 mesquites. Her brother Eric stood alone by the casket. No eulogy, no press, just the dirt, just the silence. I stayed back near the last row of folding chairs, hands in my pockets. I waited until the final prayer, then longer. When Eric turned to leave, he paused at my side. "You did right by her," he said. I nodded once. That was all either of us needed. Later that week, I cleared out the last box from my DOJ rotation quarters. Case closed. Assignment complete. I left the badge behind. Drove out of El Paso with the windows half down, the desert wind threading through the truck like breath through bone. Around mile marker 224, I passed a fresh Border Patrol unit heading west. Newer rig, newer paint. A young woman behind the wheel, 22 maybe, straight-backed, alert. Her radio buzzed faintly as we crossed paths. She gave a nod. I nodded back. The desert doesn't forget, and neither do the ones who keep going. But something still didn't sit right, because inside that duffel under the tape, the film, the logs, was a handwritten note, dated 1996, initialed with 3 letters I didn't recognize, and a list of names I hadn't seen before. Rachel's wasn't the last. The handwriting was neat. Slanted right uniform pressure like someone used to filling out forms. The paper itself had yellowed with age, edges brittle from heat. It was tucked at the bottom of the duffel we recovered from the shack near Relay 9, folded once no envelope. Just a single-lined sheet with 7 names, 4 dates, and a set of initials I didn't recognize, RLM. I laid it flat under the desk lamp in the temporary office we were still using. The first 2 names, I recognized one was listed on a detainee manifest from 1994 that Rachel had flagged. The second belonged to a woman who'd been reported missing from a Texas holding center, later transferred to an unlisted facility with no release documentation. The others, I had to look up. What I found kept me staring at that page for a long time. Every name traced back to a record that either stopped mid-transfer or ended with the same phrase, non-repatriable. Awaiting relocation. But relocation never happened. There were no outbound flight logs, no partner agency filings. It was like they just evaporated. All 7 had been processed through a single checkpoint in a 60-mile zone, one I hadn't focused on before, because it hadn't shown up in Rachel's notes. But when I pulled an archived maintenance roster for that stretch of border, I found the same 3 initials, RLM, next to an inspection entry from April 1995. That was 2 weeks before Rachel went missing. Whoever RLM was, they weren't a ghost. They were embedded, authorized, and close. I called DOJ to request internal credential cross-checks. Told them I needed every field agent, subcontractor, and contractor with matching initials on record between 1990 and 2000. It took them 3 days. When the list came through, it had only one match. Roger L. Merrick. Contracted through a civilian security liaison program in 1993, then transferred to border enforcement analysis in early '94. The records dried up after that. No termination date, no reassignment. Just a deadline. I tracked the last known address to a town just south of Las Cruces, a place called Fairview. Small, out of the way, dusty, single-lane kind of place, the kind where the only gas station closes at 6 and everybody knows what time the train passes. Merrick's file said he'd owned property there, a trailer tucked behind a feed store, until a foreclosure in 2003. After that, nothing. But a contact at the DMV found a renewal on a vehicle registration under the same name dated only 2 years back. Not a trailer, a warehouse lease, listed under a dummy holding company. No signage. Just a building at the edge of town with one rusted bay door and a gravel lot that didn't show up on satellite until after 2010. I went alone, left the truck parked behind a bakery a block down, and walked the rest of the way in. No lights on, no movement. But the padlock on the side entry wasn't latched. I slipped inside through the service door and waited until my eyes adjusted. The inside smelled like dry paper and oil. Dim fluorescent bulbs flickered overhead, most were out. In the back corner, under a tarp, I found 2 metal cabinets stacked with old agency forms, faded manila folders, and a filing box labeled K6 Retained Assets. I lifted the lid. Inside were laminated ID badges, expired field authorizations, and 3 cassette tapes unmarked except for date ranges. I took the box and backed out, locking the door behind me with the same padlock I'd found. Back in the city, I ran the tapes. One was blank. The second had audio of a field report, logged nothing useful. The third one was different. It was a woman's voice, not Rachel's. Younger, sounded scared. She was reading something aloud, a script maybe. I was processed on May 2nd, 1995. I was told I would be transferred. There were other girls. They took us at night. They used numbers, no names. Then silence. Then a faint sound, footsteps maybe. Then a man's voice. That's enough. Click. The timestamp matched the same day Rachel made a note in her field log, unregistered transport. No passenger list. 5 subjects. 1 female juvenile. She'd written it in pencil, underlined it once, and never mentioned it again. Until now, I didn't know what she meant. But hearing that voice, whoever she was, it made one thing clear. Rachel had seen them. And she'd tried to do something about it. She just didn't have backup. I sent the recording to DOJ encrypted flagged urgent. Then I made one last stop back to the holding yard where Rachel's cruiser had been impounded. I hadn't checked the undercarriage before. Didn't think I needed to. But that note in the duffel, the initials, something told me I'd missed something small, something left behind. I crawled under the back axle with a flashlight and scanned slow. That's when I saw it taped to the inside lip of the rear wheel well. Plastic bag. Weather sealed. Inside, folded twice, was a page torn from Rachel's own logbook. Her handwriting. Short phrases. Sectors wrong. Intake falsified. Relay 9 is real. Trust no one except EK. EK wasn't a name I recognized, not yet, but it gave me something to hold on to. A next step. A direction. I copied the page and resealed it. Left the original where I found it. Sometimes evidence is safest where it's already been buried. When I got home that night, I put the cassette back in the deck and played it once more. Not to analyze it, just to listen. That voice, trembling quiet, half-whispered, it stayed with me. I didn't know her name, but I was going to find it, because Rachel had tried. And if someone else had survived somewhere out there, they deserved to know someone was still listening. The last line on her torn page was the only thing not underlined. It just read, "She's still out there." The tip came from a former detention contractor based out of New Mexico, a woman named Dana who'd been off-grid since '99. She didn't give her last name over the phone, just said she'd seen the initials RLM on a manifest once, and she remembered it because the man who signed it never spoke. She said he wore mirrored glasses even indoors, and didn't travel with agents, just transport drivers. But what caught her attention was the way the girls reacted when he walked into the intake room. They froze, like they knew. She never filed anything official, but she remembered a detail: he always requested one route, Highway 17 northbound, and always after dark. I asked how many trips she saw. She said, enough, then hung up. That put me back on Red Cut Wash, and by extension, back on Highway 17. I drove the stretch twice that week, once during daylight, once after midnight. The first trip showed me nothing. Dust, dead road, old fence posts. But the second time, just past mile marker 211, I saw it. Tire tracks veering off the shoulder, disappearing behind a ridge. Not fresh. Maybe 2 weeks old. But they didn't match anything local. Wide gauge. Utility grade, possibly armored. I marked the location and came back 2 days later on foot. That's when I found the sinkhole. Not natural. Not new. Covered by a panel of brush and scrap metal that had been laid deliberately secured at the corners. When I lifted the sheet, the smell came first, then the heat, and then the shape: a rusted-out cargo van sunk into the earth like it had been swallowed. It took hours to extract the rear doors. Inside there was no cargo, no gear, just dust insulation and something half buried in the floor pan, a canvas bag, weather-sealed, wedged behind the wiring. Inside it were photos. Dozens of them. Some dated. Most not. Polaroids shot under harsh light, all from the same angle, girls one at a time, standing in front of a cinder block wall with faded numbers spray-painted behind them. Their expressions varied. Some wide-eyed, some distant, some defiant, but none smiling. And one of them was the girl from the cassette. Her face was thinner now, cheeks sunken, but her eyes, those hadn't changed. I didn't know her name yet, but I knew that face. I took the entire bag straight to the DOJ liaison, told them if they didn't escalate now, I would go straight to press. No redactions, no delays. I think they heard it in my voice. I wasn't bluffing. 2 days later, I got the green light. Federal Task Force. Limited clearance. Warrant for active excavation across the listed coordinates tied to Red Cut Wash and Relay 9. We broke ground on the far side of the wash where Rachel had noted unusual erosion patterns. It took less than a day to find the bunker. It wasn't deep, no more than 6 feet below the surface, but it was reinforced with sheet metal and foam insulation. The hatch had rusted shut, but once we forced it open, the air that came up was thick and dry. Inside were 3 compartments. 2 held empty crates labeled only with barcodes. The third had something different. A metal chair bolted to the floor, shackles on the arms, on. And beside it a file cabinet with 1 drawer left unlocked. Inside were audio tapes, lots of them, marked by date, not content. And beneath them, a notebook, spiral-bound, the cover torn. Inside were field notes Rachel's handwriting. The same slant, the same pressure. She'd been here. She'd seen this. There was 1 note dated May 16th, 1995. It read, "Facility confirmed. 3 occupants. 1 juvenile female restrained. Requesting extraction. No response. Will hold until nightfall." Then another line in different ink. "If I don't get out, tell Eric I'm sorry. Tell my sister I didn't quit. Not ever." I had to step away after that. Let someone else take over the cataloging. I couldn't read the rest. Not then. Over the next 72 hours, the bunker was officially classified as a black site, unauthorized, unlisted, unregulated. We found more evidence, more cassettes, more bags. DNA samples matched to 3 missing juveniles reported in 94 and 95. 1 confirmed dead, 2 still unaccounted for. One of those matched the girl in the Polaroid, which meant by all logic, she could still be alive, and if she was, we needed to move fast. That's when I heard from Eli. He'd stayed in Fairview after I pulled out. Hadn't said much, just kept eyes on the warehouse where we'd found the tapes. He said someone came by the property just after dusk. Man, older, stocky, walked with a limp. Drove a black sedan with no plates, didn't go inside, just stood at the fence looking toward the tree line. Then he dropped something in the mailbox and left. Eli waited 2 hours before retrieving it. Said it was a manila envelope with no name. Inside was a key. I met him at the diner off Route 9, same one Rachel used to stop at on long runs. He slid the key across the table and said, "You'll know where it goes." And he was right. I did. It matched the lock at the rear entry of a facility listed in the intake logs from 1995, one labeled as decommissioned but never fully torn down. Sector 7. Building C. Part of the old intake corridor system. Off-grid. Unlit. Still standing. That would be our next stop. But what we didn't know yet, what none of us expected, was that someone was already waiting inside. And she wasn't alone. She was sitting on the floor when we found her. Back against the far wall, knees drawn in, head low. There was a cot, but she hadn't used it. She looked up when I stepped through the door. Just once. Then her eyes dropped again. No screaming. No fight. Just a girl who'd lived too long in silence. Her name was Hannah. 17 years old. Missing since 94. Her case had been buried under an administrative backlog in Oklahoma. Never made the news. But she was real. Breathing. Thin, but alive. The other girl, Lena, was already gone by the time we got there. No signs of forced exit. No sign of a struggle. And of just an empty second cot and a lock bolt turned from the inside. We think she heard us coming. We think she slipped out before the breach. She left behind a cassette tape, same kind Rachel had used, labeled in careful block letters. To whoever finds this, please don't stop looking. I played it alone in my car hours later. Her voice was clear, older than her face suggested. She talked about the girls that didn't make it, the ones who gave up, the ones who were sold. She said Rachel tried to get her out, tried twice, said she didn't blame her for what happened. She said if anyone ever found the place, they needed to burn it. Burn the walls, the papers, the names. She didn't want it turned into a memorial. She wanted it gone. We got Hannah to a trauma unit in San Antonio. She hasn't said much since. Won't speak to press. Won't meet with anyone from DOJ. But she lets her nurse braid her hair every night. And she asked for a map. That's what stuck with me. A paper map, not digital. Not. She circles a new county every morning working westward. Says she wants to remember where she's not anymore. As for Rachel, there's no grave. No DNA confirmation. But after the second raid on the warehouse, we recovered another cassette. One I hadn't seen before. It was dated 4 days after her last confirmed sighting. The voice on it was male, thick accent, quiet tone. He says her name. Then there's a pause. Then he says termination confirmed. We don't know if it's real. Could have been faked. Could have been someone trying to throw the trail. But I've listened to it more times than I'll admit. Not because I believe it, but because I need to understand how someone could say those words like that. Like he was reciting a shift change. There's still no clear chain of command, no list of who ran what. The deeper we dig, the more it splits contractors with fake credentials. Shell companies' records scrubbed before they were even typed. But we have names now. Faces. And a partial manifest recovered from Red Cut Wash. DOJ is building the case. Slowly. Quietly. And there's a field office newly staffed outside El Paso where agents are cross-referencing missing girls from 92 through 98. It's not justice yet, but it's something. A start. I still think about Rachel, about the way she documented everything even when no one answered her calls, about how she kept the tapes safe, how she left enough for anyone to follow. She didn't get to testify. She didn't get to come home. But she did something no one else in the system had the courage to do. She stayed. Until the very last minute she stayed. And maybe that's the only reason Hannah's still alive. I don't know what comes next. Not really. But I've learned that sometimes the best thing you can do is keep the record straight. Leave a light on in the dark. And tell it exactly how it happened, because that's what truth deserves. Even if no one claps. Even if no one says thank you. If this story stayed with you, consider sharing it so no name gets left behind.